In this video, I want to talk about erotic transference. So let's get into that. Hello and welcome to the Therapy Business School. My name is James Taylor. I'm an online counsellor, hypnotherapist and life coach. I'm also an author, a podcaster and a YouTuber. So erotic transference, let's talk about that. Before we do, just a promotional shout out. I've just created a Facebook group for therapists or student therapists only. It's a private group. The link will be in the description below. So let's talk about erotic transference. Now, when I was training to be a counsellor, the tutor said, this is not a case of if it will happen, it's a case of when it will happen. And I found that to be true. So what is transference? What is erotic transference? What are these words? Well, erotic transference is when a client becomes attracted to you in a way that is different from a regular therapeutic relationship. So they might start having feelings for you. There might be sexualized feelings. They might make up stories or think about things or fantasies that they might have a connection with you, a relationship with you, this kind of thing. Now, it can also be the other way around, where the therapist can have these sexualized feelings towards their clients. And that's erotic transference, but it comes under counter transference as well. To explain what I mean there, counter transference is when a therapist is having thoughts or feelings of any regard towards the client. So that could be positive transference or paternal transference or negative transference, whatever it might be. So that's the counter transference when it's coming from the therapist to the client. But erotic transference can be either the client has feelings of a sexualized nature towards the therapist, or the therapist can have feelings of a sexualized nature towards their client. Think about the dynamic that a therapist and a client have. The therapist is generally intently listening, giving UPR or unconditional positive regard, listening to every word, really trying to understand exactly what the client is saying, being there with them emotionally and supporting them on their journey. Just think about that dynamic for a second. Can you think of any other relationship where that happens? Because I can't. And that can be an incredibly attractive dynamic for a client to know that they're really being listened to. Really being listened to by the therapist. Diving off piste a little bit, during the Crimean War, Florence Nightingale, known as the Lady of the Lamp, this happened a lot there. There was a lot of erotic transference because the soldiers who she was caring for had been in the most awful of situations. Some had lost limbs, some had nearly died, and here was Florence Nightingale tending to them, to their every need, listening to them, supporting them, comforting them, changing the wounds, reassuring them, spending time with them. And a lot of the soldiers fell in love with Florence Nightingale. They didn't know anything about her personality. You just saw a one side of her, which was her work dynamic as a nurse. And this became known as the Florence Nightingale effect. So that is a great example of erotic transference. The soldiers, knowing nothing about Florence Nightingale, because she was so attentive to them, they developed feelings for her. Now this can happen in therapy. Now, if it happens, there's a few ways of going about it. One is to ignore it. Now, anyone who knows what I'm like has probably heard me say this. I like elephants. I love elephants. I just don't want one in the room with me. So you can ignore it, but it's not what I'd recommend you do. I would definitely recommend you take it to supervision if you're feeling this is happening, as in a client has erotic transference towards you. I would definitely take that to supervision and get some advice and discuss it there. But one of the things that you can do is you can talk about it. You can talk about it in the therapy setting. And this has got to be handled extremely sensitively and carefully, because you don't want the client to feel embarrassed or rejected, or as if it's her feelings aren't validated. You don't want the client to feel any of those feelings at all, but you do want the client to understand that you're there for them in a professional capacity only. Okay, only a professional capacity. So this can be exploring with the client. Think things like, let's say it was brought up in a session and a client was saying these things, that they were having these feelings for you. Well, it's okay to be saying, what makes you have those feelings? And this professional relationship we have, it's very, very normal for me to listen to you very, very carefully without really disclosing much about myself at all. So what is it that you're finding attractive there? Because really, would it be fair to say you don't really know me? You only know one side of me, but you don't know me as the person. You know me as the therapist. Now, this can sometimes happen where a client has not had that kind of attention in their past. Something they may have craved, either from a parent or a caregiver or a loved one. They might have felt rejection. They might have felt humiliation. They might have just needed some comfort when they were younger. And then that projection of that thing they've wanted is now projected onto you, and you're giving it by being a professional therapist. See how the line can, for the client anyway, can be quite blurred for this. So it's okay to talk about it now, and it's okay to encourage a client to talk about it. Now, one of the things that might crop up is a client may have a fear that if they disclose this to you, you're going to end the sessions. And that can create an elephant in the room, because the client may have these feelings. You've now got fear that you may reject them if they disclose anything, and then that hinders the therapeutic work that's going on. So it's good to name these things. Now, of course, it might come to a state where the work cannot continue if the feelings are like this. And it might be a case of the client goes to work with another therapist. Now, if that happens, endings are really, really important. And I mentioned endings on my last upload. Endings are so important. So it's important that the client doesn't feel rejected by you. And in fact, ideally, they can see that you're staying within a professional capacity and the ethical code and the dynamics and this kind of stuff. But really, you're being uber respectful to the therapeutic relationship, and you will not cross a line. Not because you don't want to, because as in you're attracted, it's because that's just not what the relationship is. The relationship is therapeutic, and therapeutic only. So that's that side of things. If a client is having erotic feelings towards you, what about if you're having erotic feelings towards your client? Well, in the prep I was doing for this video, it transpires that some study was done. I think the one I found was in 2006, and it was saying something along the lines of 80% of therapists have had erotic feelings towards their clients. And that number really surprised me. That's quite a lot. I think 80% have had erotic feelings, but apparently this study was done, and it was done by a professional body. If I can find where I found that, if I can find where I saw that, I'll put the reference to it in the comments below. But what about if you, as a therapist, are having erotic feelings towards your client? Well, just like with a client, it might be something in their background that they were craving, and that transference is happening onto you because you're given this attentive behaviour on your side. If it's happening for you, it might be a worthwhile question to ask, and I definitely take it to supervision, is what's happening for you to have those feelings about the client? And also, is it about the client that you're having the feelings, or is it about something else? So is it about the person who's in front of you, or is it something within you that's in your past as the therapist? Okay, so whatever happens, take it to supervision. It's a must, because there is a line in the sand and you shouldn't be crossing it. And of course, we all know this, but sadly, there'll always be some who do. Now, this, if you look back at history with Freud's mentor, Francis Breuer, I'm probably saying that incorrect, he had a client, and this is where the phrase talking therapy came from. And he had a client, and she would talk a lot about her fantasies. And I believe it's Francis Breuer, he would go home and talk to his wife about it. And it became such an issue that his wife was not happy, because that's all he was talking about was this client. And then later on, that client said she was pregnant, and her therapist, Breuer, I'm probably saying the name wrong, but she said the therapist was responsible. And there was no suggestion that he'd ever crossed the line and had any sexual connection with his client at all. But she said that he was responsible. So that was probably the first case of erotic transference ever being recorded, and Freud later documented it. So just a bit of a tip and a few guides around erotic transference. It can happen both ways. It can happen the client towards you, it can happen you towards the client. And hopefully this has given you a bit of a guide on what to do if that pops up. Now, on the next video, I'm going to be talking about how to avoid burnout as a therapist. So if you want to see that, make sure you do the like, the share and the subscribe, and ring the notification bell so you get notified every time I upload a new video. And I hope you've enjoyed this one. If you have, please stick around, check out the other videos on my channel, and don't forget to join that new Facebook group as well. It's a private group, and it's to build up a bit of a community, and it's a bolt-on to this channel as well. Alright, so I'll see you on the next video. This is James from Therapy Business School. Bye bye.